This happened in early fall of 2011 when I was 21. I just bought a new set of night vision goggles and I had to try them out. I went off to an area that I usually hunt. The trailhead is only about a 45-minute drive from town, but the area I hunt is about a 4 to 5 hour hike. I got to the place about 5 p.m., giving me a bit of time to start the hike before it got dark. I noticed an old, beat-up green truck parked there, which to me was odd. This trail isn't maintained at all, and I've never met another person in this area in the last 10 years of hunting this place with my family. Just ignoring it, I grabbed my pack and headed out. About an hour into the hike, I came to a narrow path with thick trees on either side, but maybe 50 yards past was a clearing with a lone, massive cottonwood in the center. As I got closer, I heard crying, like someone was experiencing the end of the world type wailing. I started to jog toward the clearing, thinking maybe someone was hurt or being attacked, as there are a lot of mountain lions in this area, so many that it's actually rare that I don't see one when I'm hiking through. When I broke out into the clearing, I heard a woman shout, then a choking sound. I looked around and couldn't see anything, so I ran to the side of the lone tree. There was a woman flailing, hanging from a branch. I dropped my pack and ran to her. I tried to get myself under her to pick her up on my shoulders. She kept flailing and kicking and trying to hit me in the face, so I grabbed my knife and hugged her to get her to be still and reached up and cut the rope right around her neck. I didn't have her as tight as I thought and gave her a small cut on the neck and let her fall hard to the ground. Trying to see if she was okay, I knelt down and tried to talk to her and see if she was still breathing. She just ignored me and stared into the sky, crying. Not knowing what else to do and there being no service in the area, I grabbed her in a fireman's carry and jogged as quick as I could back to my truck. Once at my truck, still having no service, I threw her into the back seat, set my child locks, and hauled her to the hospital. In the emergency room, I carried her in. She was quiet now and not fighting. I told them we were working out in our apartment's gym and a wire fell from the ceiling, choking her while she was on a treadmill. Stupid to lie, I know that now. They took her back, and shortly after some police showed up. One went into her room and the other pulled me to the side to ask what really happened. After telling them the truth, the officer came out and said she confirmed what really happened. They took some info from me and left. I went into her room to see how she was. I spoke a bunch about how what she was doing was not the right answer, and there are people who would be heartbroken after her death. She didn't say a word the entire time, just kept staring into the ceiling lights. I left her a note with my name and number and told her if she ever needed anything to let me know. Then I left. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from a foreign number. I ignored it, not thinking about the girl from earlier. She left me a long message, first thanking me for saving her, then telling me what all happened. She was a 17-year-old high school exchange student who, the day before her hanging, went to a party with some friends from class. There she was taken advantage of. Not wanting to shame her family, she tried to end her own life. She went on to say after a week in the hospital, she was sent back to Japan. She continued with how thankful she is for me, how she knows it was not the right thing. She gave me her number and asked to call so she can thank me properly. I called that night and spoke with her. She went on and on about how thankful she was and how amazing I must be. She then asked me for my address to send me a gift. I gave it to her. Kind of a mistake. After several weeks, we keep talking pretty often, and once a week she sends me gifts. Flowers and things from Japan. Tons of candy and just random things. She one day tells me the program is letting her go back to finish out the year, and she wants to meet with me to thank me in person over dinner. I said I guess we could meet. What harm would there be? Well, things just started to progress when she got back. Every day she would text and call wanting to meet with me again. If I ignored her, she would just keep it up with texts like every 5 minutes, asking how I'm doing, how is work, what do I want so she can buy it for me, when can she hang out, and things like that. After several more weeks of trying to tell her to relax, it's done and over, I get that she is thankful. She begins to get more personal, saying how we are destined to be together. The gods put us there at the same time for a reason, how much she misses me, how she will make an amazing wife who will cook and be a great mother to our children someday. At this point, I had had enough. She was 18 by then, but it was getting out of hand. I told her to leave me alone, but she never replied. I have horrible insomnia from my PTSD while I was in Iraq, so I take some pretty strong sleeping pills, which knock me out for at least 6 hours. Nothing will wake me. About a week after I told her to go away, I woke up at my normal time for work. When I went to get up, I saw someone was in my bed. I knew it was her right away. I stood up and shouted, "What in God's name are you doing?" She woke up, still all sleepy-eyed, and said some stuff in Japanese. I yelled at her to speak English. She then said, "See, my love, I'm showing you how good we can sleep together. You will never know I'm here, but I can comfort you during your bad dreams. Doesn't that make you happy?" I was livid. I asked how she got in, and she told me by my sliding glass door. To clarify, I live on the outskirts of a large city, by Wyoming standards, on 40 acres, and have a shooting range which I use daily after work. I go out back through my sliding door and usually forget to lock it. I told her to get out and to never come back. The rest of the school year went by, and I didn't hear a word from her. Summer came, and knowing she went back to Japan, I relaxed and everything more or less went back to normal. Although I did change my phone number just to be safe. A few days into August 2012 came, and I had a knock on my door. I opened it thinking it was the mailman or something. Nope, it was her. She had the biggest smile on her face. Before I could force her to leave, she told me my number didn't work anymore, so she came in person to tell me she was accepted to the local college and will be able to be close to me again. Before she could say her next sentence, I told her that I hate you. I couldn't care less if she died. She took off running and crying to her truck. Kind of feeling bad about what I said, I didn't feel like cooking, so about 10 minutes later I left to get something to eat. Halfway down the road, I noticed traffic was backed up, which is crazy because I'm in a rural area. There isn't many people here to begin with. When I finally got up to the point that started the traffic, I saw it was a rollover. A disgusting old green truck was rolled over into a ditch with police, fire trucks, and ambulance all around. I rushed right to the hospital, feeling like absolute garbage. After several hours, they finally let me in to see her. She had a few broken ribs, right arm and left leg broken, and a torn muscle in her neck. Before I had a chance to even walk into the room, she was crying her eyes out, saying how sorry she is, how she never meant to anger me. I also apologized, and we both agreed to restart and just try to be normal friends. We were married in 2015 and had our first child later that year. We have been happy together ever since. She still gives me guff about how she finally got her way and she was right all along. But somehow, through all the crazy, I still love the ever-living life out of her. This story happened to my dad and his wife. He was driving in the middle of nowhere in Utah, I believe, and he and his wife wanted to make a stop at a gas station to get snacks, use the bathroom, etc. When he got to the gas station, he saw a police car parked out in the lot. When they walked into the gas station, he saw a man at the register. My dad saw that the man was listening to a police radio. My dad didn't really think anything of it. He asked the man if he needed a key to the bathroom, and the man looked pretty anxious and uncomfortable. The man told my dad that he didn't think that he needed one, so my dad walked to the bathroom. Right before he went in, he saw a doorway with a curtain in front of it next to the bathroom door. My dad looked at the end of the curtain, and all he saw was a man's feet with what he believes to be the police officer's say no, which got me into a lot of trouble. I met a boy who I'll just call Cheryl, since that was the account the boy had at the time. He and I started out as good friends, talking a lot and even shared common interests. I'm a lesbian and not into guys for obvious reasons, and since I'm a lesbian, I felt horrible when he told me he had feelings for me. I apologized profusely because I wasn't into dudes. After that, we stopped talking for a little before I started to have him leave messages on my account, spamming me with a request on Discord, which was now deleted, and even found my Snapchat and Instagram. This was horrifying, and I didn't understand why he was bothering me. So one night I messaged him on Amino asking him to please stop, and that I wasn't liking how he was acting. He apologized and we became friends for a little, role-playing Riverdale a bit and talking now and then. One night when I was up late, he and I had been talking. He said he was now transgender, and said now that he was trans and still deeply in love with me, we could date. I shook my head at this because, yes, I was lesbian, but I didn't want to be with him after all the ways he treated me. Soon enough, he started to get angry. He called me all sorts of terrible names, told me I was dumb and worthless, and even reported me to Amino for what I hadn't done. I soon messaged a creator on Amino and asked her to please tell him to stop, and she did, and also suspended his account for 24 hours. I blocked him, and we never really talked. I occasionally get messages, but to this day, I still just ignore them. One summer, my parents had booked a cabin for us for a whole week. I can't remember exactly how old I was. I'm guessing about 12. Me, my big sister, and my little brother had been playing and exploring outside all day. We were tired, so when our parents asked if we wanted to go to the grocery store with them, me and my sister said no. My little brother wanted to go, and he was too young to be under our supervision anyways, even if he wanted to stay. They said that they would be back soon, and they trusted us enough to leave us back at the cabin, as long as we promised to stay inside and stay away from the lake. Both my parents were always very strict about not letting us swim unauthorized. A couple of moments passed with me and my sister chatting until she decided to take a nap on the couch. I had been chugging juice all evening, so I needed to head to the toilet. The toilet was a separate building near the main cabin, closer to the lake. It was about 8 o'clock, and the evening had already started to darken since it was almost October. I've always loved scary stories, and I enjoyed the misty nightfall. I was halfway to the toilet when, suddenly, I heard a loud crack in the woods. The sound came from right in front of me, behind the toilet. I froze and stood quiet for a while. I saw nothing. I thought that it might have been a big animal, so I ran straight towards the toilet. I closed the door quickly behind me. After catching my breath, I peeked from its little window, and I heard more loud movement. It did sound like a big animal right behind the toilet. More branches cracking, then a big splash. Something had just jumped into the lake. I thought the route was clear enough and slammed open the door. I started running back to the main cabin, not looking back. All of a sudden, I heard my dad's voice calling my name. I stopped and listened. I was now 100% sure that it was indeed my dad's voice. Before I turned my head towards the voice, I could see that our car was not in the driveway yet. I got chills and turned to where the voice came from, the lake. To my confusion, I saw my dad, floating in the lake, absolutely still, with a frozen smile on his face. For a moment, I thought that he hadn't left after all. "Come here," he was shouting, again and again with the same stiff voice. I saw no movement in the water. It's like he just stood there, but it was way too far from the coast or his, or anyone's legs could reach the bottom. I realized almost immediately that this was not my dad. My legs went numb from fear, but I got back to the main cabin, crying my eyes out in panic. I was too afraid to look out the window and just locked the doors. My sister was still asleep, and just when I was about to wake her up, I heard a car. I looked from the kitchen window and soon saw my mom, brother, and my dad coming out of the car, smiling and laughing. My whole body was cold. The whole situation felt unreal. I asked my father later, had he been in the water before? He was confused, then laughed it off with, maybe it was a big fish in there. I tried to forget what I saw and heard, but I still can't. I wasn't dreaming. It was something I can't explain with logic. I'm 24 years old now, and I'm still afraid that I will someday experience something like this again. I try not to think what would have happened if I had followed him into the water. This happened back in November of 2018. I woke up early that morning at around 7:30 a.m. My wife usually works earlier shifts, and I drive her to work. We made it to her work at around 8, and I got home at around 8:30. I normally work evening shifts at my job, so I try to get some more sleep as soon as I get home. That morning when I got home, I went back into bed in an attempt to fall back asleep. About 10 minutes rolled by when I got a knock on the door. My wife and I live next to most of my in-laws, so I just assumed it was one of them. I wasn't going to answer it, but the knocking continued. I got up to answer the door, thinking it would be one of my in-laws. To my surprise, it was this man that I had never met before. He was skinny, was about 5'8", the same height as me. He proceeded to ask me if I came up to his house and put his girlfriend in my car. I immediately told him no. At the time the story occurred, my wife and I were just engaged. I told him I took my fiancée to work and came home. He kept insisting that I came up to his house, but I told him if I did, I would be honest and say that I did. As soon as I told him that, he then went on to talk about his boots and how nice they were, which I thought was kind of weird. That gave me the impression that he was probably on drugs. He left my house afterward and went home. About 15 minutes later, he came back to my house and knocked on the door. When I answered, he said he just left his girlfriend's present on my porch. I played it safe and said okay, but I didn't remember seeing a present. The present he held up to me looked like a cheap makeup set you would give a 10-year-old. Definitely not something you would give your adult girlfriend. At this point, I got very suspicious. After I shut the door again, I peeked out the living room window to see if he was still outside. He was standing right by my brother-in-law's truck, which was close to my vehicle, looking straight at my house. It felt like we made direct eye contact. That should have been when I called the police, but once again, I let it go. 3 hours went by, and I still kept replaying the scenario in my head. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard another knock on the door. I knew it was him again because the knock seemed more like a bang. I began to panic, trying to call my brother-in-law who lived next door and debating on if I should call the police. I proceeded to open the door. To no surprise, it was him. As soon as he saw me, he asked me whose car was outside of my house, and I told him it was mine. At that moment, his entire persona just changed. He began getting very angry. He insisted that his friend saw his girlfriend get in my car and began talking about fighting me. I remember the words he said to me. "You come out here and we'll settle this like men instead of staying in your house. That's what sissies do." I'll never forget his piercing stare as if he had completely lost his mind. Being afraid because I didn't know the guy, I tried to be the bigger person and just explained to him that I didn't do it. But the way he looked at me and talked to me really started to tick me off. I didn't know what to do. I told him to hang on a minute in a more aggravated tone and began to walk outside. Within the few seconds it took me to go out to my porch, it was like a switch just flipped inside my head. I was just so angry that this guy, who I didn't even know, had accused me of something I didn't do, and had bothered me 3 times in one day. I just blacked out and began yelling at the guy. He jumped off my porch before I even got outside, but continued to run his mouth. I told him to get off my property before I called the cops, which sent him running. I called the police right after, and my sister-in-law came to check on me. My brother-in-law came over soon after as well. 10 minutes after I called 911, the police arrived. I didn't know much about the guy other than what he looked like, but my in-laws knew the guy's name and where he lived. I slammed the door as he began to run away, so I didn't see how he left. My in-laws told the police and I that he left in a car which they knew the type and model of. They knew vital information that helped the police track this guy down. They went into the direction the car he was in went. When they couldn't find him then, the police pulled up to his house. They approached him as he was walking toward his home, not too long after they parked. I don't know what the police did. Whatever they did, it worked. I stood outside my house as my grandmother-in-law pulled up and handed me a package for my wife. At the same time, the police left. The guy walked out onto the road beside his house and just stood there staring at me. I didn't let it faze me and just continued to grab the package, going on about the rest of my day. As I left to pick up my wife from work later on, my in-laws stayed at the house to make sure everything was unharmed. The guy came back down and told my in-laws to tell me he was sorry. My other brother-in-law, who is now deceased, approached the guy to find out why he had a problem with me. They didn't get along, but my brother-in-law put their differences aside to figure out what the problem was. Just as I suspected, the guy was on drugs. He had been doing meth that night before, and I'm guessing his friend was too. My wife and his girlfriend both had the same hair color. When I took my wife to work that morning, either he or his friend saw my wife and thought she was his girlfriend. Though that doesn't justify what he did, I'm glad I know now why this all happened. To this day, that stands as the most terrifying experience of my life. Never in my life have I ever felt more scared and endangered than that day. I just thank God it didn't turn out worse than it did. He really had his hand on me that day. I don't have any problems with this guy anymore, but needless to say, he's the reason why I own a gun now. Let's start with all the introductions first. I'm a 37-year-old woman with a bit of a psychic twinkle. I'm a sensitive empath, which basically means I can sense spiritual presences and I can pick up other emotions. My mother's the same, as was my grandfather. My grandma, not so much. She doesn't believe in all that nonsense, as she says. I'm not a medium by any means. I have seen ghosts with my own eyes since I was 7, but they don't appear to me all the time. They don't talk to me. I can't call upon the spirits for information. That has never been my gift, but I can tell if one is around. I can feel their energy and my body reacts in certain ways. My mom and I jokingly call it our spidey sense. Apart from the fact that I am a practicing third-generation witch, I have also been a paranormal investigator for 19 years now. I run an investigation team by the name of Paranormal MIT, and I know it is weird, but when it comes to investigations, I prefer to take a scientific approach rather than a metaphysical one. The reason being is proof. Someone can say they feel a presence, but how do you prove a feeling? You can't. It is personal, it can't be documented, it can't be shared unless you were there. As such, it can't be considered evidence. Those are my personal thoughts. I am also of the mind that any evidence that is presented should be scrutinized and analyzed severely before publication. Why? Because there is so much fake nonsense out there that people present to the public on the daily that any real evidence gets buried, and it makes it that much harder to believe. It makes me so angry. I would give anything to capture that one piece of irrefutable proof that ghosts exist and present it to the world. I know they exist. I have had so many experiences throughout my life, there can be no doubt. All I can do is share my experiences and hope that someone believes me. That being said, the following is a true account of a shared experience with my mom that happened earlier this year. My grandma had just had surgery to repair some fractured discs in her back that she had sustained from a recent fall. They sent her to a convalescent home to recover for a month before returning to her retirement community. This wasn't the first time she had been there. She had had knee surgery several years before and stayed in the same home. I remember visiting her back then and really getting an icky vibe from the side hallway near the front. Something just felt off. But nothing other than that ever happened back then. Moving forward to earlier this year, we went to visit her. I was kind of dreading it because I remember the icky feeling from that hallway and wasn't keen to experience that again. But to my surprise, when we walked through the door, it was a fresh, lighter feeling than I remembered. I also noticed that the place had been remodeled and rearranged. It is a single-story building with a rose garden out front with a little fountain and white picket fence. You walk through the front doors into a sort of octagonal lobby with a front desk and hallways that shoot off in different directions. It is a lot bigger inside than it looks on the outside. One hallway is long and leads to the back section of the building where, I didn't know at the time, the men's rooms were. I noted that the Finch atrium was gone from the front lobby area as soon as we walked in. The woman at the front desk overheard me and said that they still have it, that it had just been moved to the new rec room in the back of the building. I thanked her, and my mom said we would go find it after our visit. An hour and a half later, we said our goodbyes to Grandma and went in search of the Finches. Mom and I took the long hallway to the back of the building and made a right into another hallway and heard the TV blasting from the rec room down at the end. As soon as we turned down the back hallway, my spidey senses started tingling. It was like the feeling from the front hallway many years ago, but not as overwhelming. Seeing as it was so faint, I shrugged it off and didn't even mention it. We got to the rec room and saw that there were 2 women there. One was clearly visiting the other, as one woman was about my mom's age. The other lady, who was in a wheelchair, looked to be about 90. The younger of the 2 had brought along her 2 mini poodles, and they were busy chasing the little Finches back and forth in their atrium. It was a tall glass case in a polished wooden frame with ornate carvings in the corners, very posh in my opinion. I tried to get the poodles' attention to get some loveys, but they were far too distracted. We were in there for maybe 30 seconds when everything changed. Okay, for those who are not sensitives, I'm going to try to explain how a spirit's presence can affect your body. There's the head squeezy, as my mom and I call it, which basically feels like someone pressing their palms into both of your temples or side of your head at the same time. Sometimes it's a light pressure, other times it can hit you like a migraine. There's what my mom calls the push, where you can feel a pressure either in the small or middle of your back like a hand pushing you forward, and the bit you feel pressure on gets a bit tingly. I don't normally get that, but I have a few times, but it happens to my mom a lot. Then of course the hairs on your arms and back of the neck. Goosebumps. That's what I call stony baloney eyes, which as the name suggests you can equate it to the feeling you get after you take a hit and the high is just kicking in. When you feel like you are wearing a masquerade mask that's a little too tight. Anywho, we were in the rec room for no more than 30 seconds when the atmosphere changed. I can only describe it as if you were outside on a mild, warm day with a cool breeze. Then suddenly a thick cloud blocks the sun, and in the shade the temperature drops and suddenly that cool breeze is downright chilly. Kinda like that. Mom and I looked at each other with wide eyes, and without a word we both turned and headed for the door. At this point, we both felt the presences, but perhaps our awkward and sudden departure tipped off said spirit to the fact that we knew it was there. Big mistake. Before we left the room, we both got hit with head squeezies. But not the nice gentle pressure ones, oh no. This one was a slam. I can only speak for myself, but this was not a hey, I'm just letting you know I'm here kind of squeeze. This was an angry, you can feel me. You can feel me and you're trying to run away, get back here kind of squeeze. So my mom and I are now speed walking down the side hall trying not to cause a scene. She's feeling her push. I am starting to get severely dizzy by intense head squeezy and stony baloney eyes. So dizzy I end up shoulder checking the wall on the left side. My mom is saying, I know, me too, just hang on till we get outside. Immediately I start getting impressions. It is male. Strong, and very, very angry. Possibly a recent death. Truth is, I never looked into it. We get outside and the feeling doesn't ease up. I ended up gripping the fence in the rose garden and it took everything for me not to lose my lunch. Wave after wave of nausea and dizziness hit me. Mom turned to me and said, I know you're worse off than me, but I cannot have this follow me home. Can you do something? So I started reciting my closing spiel I usually end my investigations with. Thank you, spirits, for communicating with us. At this time, we will be taking our leave, and you are not permitted to leave this place. We do not consent to being followed any further, and you must remain here. You must not follow us past this point. It is not allowed. We hurried to the car and she turned the engine over as soon as her key found the ignition. Before she moved, I touched the dashboard and recited a spell. Keeper of bones, I know thy face, but I may yet outstrip thy pace. As we pulled up to our house, we were feeling a bit better, but still felt an attachment, so I recited one last spell in front of the door. Who comes to me I keep, who goes from me I free, but against all I stand, who carry not my key. We entered her house and I felt instant relief. I don't know who this guy was, but even if I had my equipment with me to take measurements, I don't think I could have stayed any longer than I did. I have never felt a presence that strong before or after. I am not opposed to helping spirits, but if they attack me, intentionally or accidentally, all bets are off. In July 2008, I believe it was the 30th, me and my buddy drove to Manitoba in order to pick up some medicines for an upcoming sweat. So we get to west of Portage La Prairie and my buddy pulls into a gas station because he has to use the bathroom. I begin to doze off when all of a sudden I feel two cold and bony hands wrap around my throat. The smell of decay fills my nostrils and it makes my eyes water. I've been hunting quite a lot and I have, of course, stumbled upon animal carcasses rotting, but that is a smell I would readily prefer over the smell that this creature emitted. I can't move my head as I try to see what is on top of me. I can feel tears starting to run down my face as black dots started to dance in front of my eyes. Bang, bang, bang. I look over at the window of the truck and see my buddy smashing his hands against the window. He looks petrified and keeps screaming a word over and over, and I can't hear what it was over the ringing in my ears. I read his lips and my blood runs cold. He's screaming the word Wendigo. I think back to when I was a little kid and I had stayed up past sundown on a bitter winter evening. My father is waiting outside. He has a scared yet stern look on his face and says, "You better get inside the house, boy. There are man-eaters in these woods." For years, I pester him over and over about what he's talking about, and that's when he finally tells me about the Wendigo, the ravenous spirits that look to possess weak-willed or starving people. They are cannibals born from the harsh circumstances of the great winters that have occurred. I remember my father said all you need to do is blow a puff of air at it, and if you are of pure and strong intentions, then it vanishes in search of its next meal. However, if you are a greedy and weak-willed person, it will possess you and make you into one of them. You will constantly crave meat, but only the flesh of man will satiate your hunger. But that relief is only a few moments. Then you will be on the hunt for your next meal, walking around the woods with a constant void in your stomach and a craving stuck in your mind. I turn slightly towards the beast and puff a breath in its direction. All of a sudden, the horrid smell of decay vanishes and the hands disappear. I feel an overwhelming urge to vomit, creeping up my throat, but I restrain myself. My buddy hops into the truck. We are both silent as we drive on. Our breaths are the only sounds to break up the silence. We drive for around 10 minutes before my buddy shouts. He slams on the brakes and screeches to a halt and almost collides with the car in front of us. The car turns around and we see what is causing the sudden blockage in traffic. A Greyhound bus is pulled over to the side and a bunch of shaken-looking people are standing beside it. Their gazes can only be described as a 1,000-yard stare. RCMP cruisers surround the bus. The red and blue lights dance on our windows. My buddy turns around swearing at the inconvenience and we drive back to a shady hotel we had passed earlier. The whole way there I'm sitting motionlessly. A sense of dread is ever present in my gut as we arrive at the hotel. We check in and start putting our stuff down when my buddy turns on the news. It's a pretty terrible television, but soon enough we see breaking news flash across the screen and I stop what I'm doing. The news reporter looks shaken as she rattles off. One adult male is confirmed to be dead in what is to be called a frenzied knife attack. We're getting multiple reports of the suspect consuming parts of the male's body. The police have not commented any further. I look over to my buddy and he's gone ashen white. He looks over at me and says in a withdrawn voice, "I guess the Wendigo needed to be fed." The victim was Tim Macklin. He was brutally murdered on a Greyhound bus, number 1170, by a man named Vince Lee, who was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He told investigators that God told him to kill Tim. Tim Macklin was sleeping as Vice stabbed him and was awoken to a crazed Vince standing over him holding a hunting knife. Tim was stabbed over 60 times and dismembered. Vince consumed parts of his head and actually stuffed chunks of Tim into his pockets. Want to know the best part? Vince Lee was released with a new name and no criminal record. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and was excused from his actions. So all of the Americans that complain about your justice system, be thankful that they at least give out appropriate sentences for individuals like these. To this day, I wonder if Tim Macklin could see the crazed Wendigo staring back at him as he looked into his killer's eyes, begging for mercy. I'm sure you've heard the saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I mean, everyone who doesn't live under a rock has heard it. Well, it is true. If you find a way to eke out a living doing something you truly enjoy, something that brings you great pleasure, then you will enjoy going to work and it won't even feel like work. Your life won't feel tedious, dull, boring, or like a dead end. You won't feel like you're just punching a clock until your time comes to push daisies. I'm extremely fortunate that I managed to earn a substantial living doing what I love to do. However, it is not so simple. You see, what I love to do is depraved, sick, vile, immoral, disgusting, uncivilized, and, according to the law, highly illegal. I love to cause pain. I get great pleasure from the look of sheer terror in a person's eyes as they realize what is going to happen to them. I long for the sound of a victim screaming in great agony as they writhe in anguish. I love the knowledge that when I finally decide to deliver the sweet release of death to my victims, thereby relieving them of their suffering, it is on my terms, and my face will be the very last thing they see, assuming they still have their eyes. Before you even consider calling me and my hobby, or rather my livelihood, sick, twisted, depraved, and evil, save your much-needed breath. I have heard those things many times before, and quite frankly, I am sick and tired of so-called normal people judging me. They will never understand me and the way my brain functions. Besides, killing and causing pain is human nature. Just look at the video games we play, the movies we watch, the wars we start, the news stories that are featured on TV and the internet, the religions we follow, and just about everything else humans do. All humans have dark and depraved sides just waiting to be let out. I am just more human than most, because my dark side is all my sides, and it doesn't have to wait to be given free rein over my body. It gets plenty of exercise and fresh air, but unfortunately it also has to spend a lot of time in dark rooms and basements like this one. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only serial killer you've heard of. I mean, everyone knows of Ted Bundy. Although I personally find his victim count low, his methods sloppy and uninventive, and the fact that he got caught makes him a disgrace to his kind. Also, I am sure you have some rudimentary understanding of the evil in this world from the way people like me are portrayed in movies, books, TV, the news, and the like. I am sure that this pre-existing knowledge, combined with what I just told you, gives you an idea of what I am and what I'm capable of. What you are probably still confused about, however, is how I turn this evil hobby into a way to make more money than a Wall Street banker. Well, there are the obvious ways. Gun for hire, kidnapping people for sale and trafficking in certain rings, illegal organ sales, stealing from the victims, being a hired blade gun weapon for certain organized crimes, extracting information from people. These methods are millennia old, but with the birth of dark web forums and people posting their whereabouts on media 24/7, my profession has become much easier and more lucrative. However, the biggest cash flow comes from something that really shows how depraved and repressed humans are. I film what I do and make it available for a price on the dark web. These videos are used as training videos for others like me, but more often, they're used as certain guilty pleasures for all the sick freaks out there that aren't capable or willing to get their own hands dirty. I even take video requests for an extra fee, of course. I can kidnap whoever the client desires and do most anything to them. Oftentimes, the client just wants the victim gone for good, but as long as the client is fine with it, I can make extra money by letting others pick the methods of torture, the cause of death, and all of the other sordid details of the last hours of the victim. Sometimes these videos are even live, with paid viewers determining the victim's destiny through the comments section. It would truly shock you how many people watch these videos and leave comments and requests. But it doesn't shock me, at least not anymore. I already told you the world is a sick place. You see, I may be a sick monster, but if a large portion of humanity wasn't also depraved, I would be a poor monster. Many people have urges and desires, but they are too weak or scared to act upon them. Me, I act. I have the skills to live my fantasies hands-on instead of vicariously through others while I watch through a screen. Why am I telling you this? Well, sometimes I need to get why I cut open chests off my chest, both to brag and as a form of therapy. And besides, I figured you may be interested in who is about to torture you, and the reason that you're suffering an eventual death caused by your inability to pay a mafia loan shark on time is going to be uploaded to a forum full of torture and snuff. Now smile for the camera. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access. So remember those clown incidents during 2016, where clowns would go around scaring people all over the US? Well, me and my group of friends were some of those people. I'm the first to admit we are scumbags. However, I learned from this experience, and I am far from a monster. I had many weird things happen to me while clowning, as we called it. One of those things was meeting this guy we referred to as Shaco, named after the League of Legends character. A bit of context, I lived in Texas with this same group of friends. We spent that whole month traveling around most of the state, going to various smaller areas to spook people while avoiding police attention. During one of these runs is when we met Shaco at Marble Falls. Shaco was dressed more as a jester than a clown. Hat with bells on the side, really colorful and puffy outfit, with a masquerade mask over his face which was painted gold in color. During our clowning runs, we actually met other clowns before, so we went to talk to him, 'cause even if we were all dressed as clowns, we are still human beings. Couldn't hurt maybe to make a friend during this little prank, or so we guessed. Shaco was hiding close by in a spot near the lakes. I couldn't see his eyes, yet I noticed him staring at a few people playing by the water. Judging by where his head was pointed towards, I assumed it was a small get-together. We talked to him and everything was semi-normal for the situation. He didn't act normal though. The lot of us figured he was just hardcore into acting. Trust me, one of the other clowns we met before did the same thing. This guy acted like a madman straight from a horror novel, which didn't mess with me at all. I thought he would be fun to tag along with. So when he started asking us to follow him, no one refused. It was a large group of us, with one single guy leading them towards the lake. So nothing happened to any of us, at least. Going down this path, we spotted two guys that seemed to be a couple, judging by how they held hands and how close they were to each other. They were talking loudly, which is probably why they didn't notice us till Shaco made his first move. This guy reached up into his hat and pulled out a knife. I kid you not, this guy pulled out a knife like it was nothing. I wasn't expecting it. Most of the other clowns I meet didn't try to hurt people. They just scared people at most, just like us. Yet seeing this guy with a knife caused me to hesitate. I looked at my mates who were all freaking out silently. Like I said, we're not saints, but we didn't want to hurt anyone during this little prank. The two guys kept going, not noticing Shaco charging them till it was too late. Both of them naturally started to scream. Despite this, and obviously feeling terrified, me and my buds decided to cut them off and surround them. I guess, due to us being a-holes and not believing someone would actually get hurt, we felt the need to continue the horror. Now, our group of friends are literally a dozen guys and 2 girls. Adding Shaco made it 15 versus 2. There was no way they would get away once we got them in a circle. Once trapped by all of us, Shaco came in and then started screaming at the top of his lungs while saying weird things to one of the guys in particular.
"Darling, did you miss me? My sweet Eggo waffle, did you miss my morning light? I miss you, my dusk. I want you back."
He kept going on and on after this. My friends all had mixed feelings about the situation. Some of them were laughing, enjoying how afraid these 2 dudes were. The rest of us, well, bad vibes hit us hard. What changed this whole situation, though, and where things got 100% real, was when Shaco went close to this guy, a blonde male I'll call Jeff.
"Be mine. Be my king, and I'll be your fool. Or I'll make you disappear in your little knight in shining armor."
Shaco then put the knife close to Jeff's face. The second guy, a redhead I'll call Max, stood there balling up his fist, tears streaming from his eyes, watching the mad jester getting so close to his boyfriend. Well, we may be terrible, but none of us, however, were heartless. The 2 largest guys in my group basically grabbed Shaco from behind. Both of them were about 6'2". Shaco tried to fight them off, but one of my friends and I grabbed his feet. The couple stood there stunned, seeing us turn on Shaco when my mate Drew told them in his thick Australian accent, "Listen, we came here only for thrills, not to kill anyone, dudes. Just get out of here. Run away and call the cops, please." The moment those words left my bud Drew's mouth, they booked it back to whatever camp they had just left, leaving us with the now screaming Shaco cursing us and threatening to slit all our throats. None of us were afraid, however. Again, it was 14 of us versus him. So we tossed that madman into the lake and ran off. We got into our cars and drove away from that spot. We didn't know what happened to Shaco or the 2 guys until recently. You see, what made me write this story was that me and my friends all went to the hookah bar near my house this weekend. Drew was telling us some story about how he lost his favorite baseball when some guy with red hair came and said, "Hey guys, did you go to Lake Marble during Halloween? I mean, like, during the clown crap?" Apparently through fate, we ran into Max. He and Jeff were, in fact, a gay couple who had been stalked by Jeff's ex-boyfriend, aka, you guessed it, Shaco. Shaco was basically a stalker that had been stalking them for months even before the Halloween stunt. In fact, the stunt didn't stop the creeping at all. Shaco just kept stalking them both no matter what. For 2+ years, he tracked them all across the state till eventually, due to stress, Max broke up with Jeff. Max couldn't take a crazy guy like that, always watching them from the shadows every single day, so he bailed, leaving Jeff alone with no one to help beside his sister. What made the story terrifying to me was the sad ending. Max found out at some point in August both Jeff and his sister ended their lives together. Without Max to help through the hard times, Jeff and his sister couldn't take Shaco's madness much longer and ended their lives by hanging themselves. Max broke down crying by this point in the story. He is now trying to leave Texas by saving money due to a mixture of guilt and fear. The reason for this fear is because he got a Facebook message from an unknown account telling him, "I'll make you pay. I'll make you pay for leaving my Jeff alone. I'll make you pay." So now Max is just praying that Shaco doesn't find him before he leaves the state. I ended up buying him 3 shots that night and getting him an Uber home. I admit I'm not a good person, but I'm not pure evil. Not like him. So to whoever reads this, believe it or not, please stay safe. There are monsters lurking amongst us. And to you, Shaco, if me and my crew ever come across you, make no mistake, we aren't against beating up monsters like you, especially after the pain you put poor Jeff through, to his final moments. I'm a pretty big girl, not extremely obese, but chunky enough that it's obvious, and it's not due to diet. I have polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, which can cause issues with weight due to the pituitary gland releasing the wrong type of hormones. With this comes insulin resistance, which is like pre-diabetes. It's reversible, but not always effective. As such, in my 20s, I'm on a drug called metformin. Metformin, or glucophage, depending on what name you know it by, isn't an addictive substance. It's used to control high insulin, and I have to take it with my heaviest meals, lunch and supper, so I'm usually toting around this giant pill bottle full of white tablets. The reason why I do this is because I work part-time and attend university. I live in the dormitory of my university and have to take transit to work and back, with a bus switch downtown. Around the area where I have to switch my bus are numerous cafes and convenience stores. Needless to say, I've grabbed something to eat from there numerous times. And finally, I tend to dress goth or punk. My head's shaven on the side and I've got a few piercings. Mostly I'm left alone, but there have been times where some idiots decided to have a go at me, particularly on Friday nights. It was Friday, the 2nd of November, to put things into perspective. My instructor was ill, so class was canceled, and I had an extra hour to get to work. I usually grab a quick deli sandwich and a coffee from a cafe, the closest to the bus stop, and stick it into my backpack so I can eat it on my break. This Friday, with extra time on my hands, I decided upon arriving at my stop to stay at the cafe. I go in, order my usual plain latte and turkey bacon wrap, if you have to know, and sit down next to the window so I can keep an eye on the stop. I have my earbuds in and I'm listening to a podcast, just going through the motions. Once finishing my wrap, I unzip the front pocket of my backpack, fish out the bottle of pills, pop it, and wash it down with my latte. All at once, this guy just comes up to my table and motions for me to take my earbuds out. For a description, he's pretty tall, kind of burly, white as a sheet with his broom mustache, wearing clean civilian clothes. Nothing that set off my alarm bells. Being confused, I do so, and he tells me, "Excuse me, miss, but what exactly are those?" He was talking about my pills. A thing with me is that I'm pretty confrontational when I feel threatened, so I said to him, "None of your business?" Then this guy pulls open his jacket, flashing me a police badge. Only, he did it so quickly that I couldn't make out the details, just the shape and nothing else. "I think it is. What are those, narcotics?" At this point, I'm in complete shock. The rational part of my brain is shut off because I'm so caught off guard by this random man, potentially a cop, looming over me. "No," is all I could get out. "That's so," he says and picks up my pill bottle. Also, if you know the medication, you know they put your full name on the label, as well as what it is. Before I can tell him to give it back, he puts it in his pocket and quickly goes, "You're right, I'm confiscating these. If you want to come with me downtown to discuss this further, I suggest we do so now, before I place you under arrest." Okay, so at this point, I'm half calling him, half unsure what to say or how to react. All I'm able to say is flat out, "No," like a moron. "Do you want to be placed arrest? I'm a cop, miss, I can do that." And then he flashes out his pair of handcuffs. They're not the fluffy, kinky ones either you'd expect a fake cop to have. They're real and, as far as I can tell, metal. "I'd recommend you just follow me to my car so we can have a chat." Of course, my sense of rationality is still undermined by the sheer ridiculousness of this situation, so I end up just blurting out, "I'm not using drugs. Bad ones, that's medicine." He says this cliche, "Yeah, that's what they all say," and proceeds to reach for my arm. When he grabs it, my senses finally come to me and I pull back up against the window. "Give me back my medication," I yell, loud enough to get attention from the patrons and staff. "Miss, I'm asking you to come quietly," he says along those lines. I keep my mouth running.
"That's my medication for diabetes, and I need it. It says so on the bottle. If you're a cop, give me my pills back and call for backup. Better yet,"
I proceed to grab my phone.
"I'll call the cops here because there's been a mistake."
That got him angry. He says something along the lines of, "You're resisting arrest," and tries to grab my arm again. At this point, I'm dialing 911 and one of the baristas is coming out from behind the counter. He asks this guy, "What are you doing?" It finally scares the creep, and he takes off. Granted, with my medication in his pocket. I speak to the dispatcher and the real cops show up within minutes. I speak to the cops and explain what happened. The barista also tells them that this guy has been sitting in the cafe for over an hour before I showed up, but hadn't been bothering other customers, just me apparently. Cops took surveillance from the security cameras, though of course there's none pointing out into the road. I actually had to go to the station to file a report because, yup, there were no undercover narc cops in that area that day. So, 100% wasn't an actual one. I suspected as much, but in our society, you're inclined to believe and trust in authority figures. These days not so much, but disobeying them isn't in our programming usually. It really isn't in mine either, but the whole thing was fishy from the get-go. Considering, of course, it was my metformin he took, and I had to replace the entire 3-month bottle and go several hours between doses, something that puts me at risk for hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. I am, of course, quite angry at this idiot still, but I'll admit I'm also fully aware and freaked out that I was in a whole lot of danger too. It's not common where I live, but human trafficking is a thing, and the fact that this guy wanted me, a lone female who looks the type to use some kind of illegal substance, to go with him alone gets to me. What if my common sense didn't kick in, or the barista hadn't done something? The people around us sure didn't pull a "what would you do" and come to my rescue. The biggest thing that's freaky is that not only has this guy not been caught yet, but my pills were later recovered. The bottle was found a few blocks away, still half full, by eyeballing it, which confirms the cop theory that he wasn't some desperate junkie or guy trying to rob me. He wouldn't have dumped the pills if he wanted to sell them. So they dubbed this an attempted abduction due to his aggressiveness to get me to go with him. Before anyone asks, no, I can't take them. Not that I could anyway. The cops are keeping the bottle for evidence because fingerprints exist. I've been keeping my eyes out in case fake cop comes wandering onto my campus, and I did switch my bus route. I'm taking the long way, which I don't enjoy, but until they catch the creep, that's the way it's gotta be, unfortunately. Otherwise, so far I've gotten no creepy phone calls, no random people texting me, no cryptic messages on my social media platforms, nothing. If this guy is smart, he wouldn't even try anyways. I'm really hoping he's smart for my own sanity. I'm in my early 20s. I work overnights at a group home for autistic children. There were 3 boys living in the house. My job was to come in. If they weren't asleep when I got there, I would get them to sleep. I would do some paperwork and do most of the cleaning. Then in the morning, I would wake them up, get them ready for school, make breakfast, and tell the morning person about anything that might have happened overnight, or that the afternoon or evening person told me about what had happened the previous day. All told, it was an easy job. I loved being with the boys when they were awake, but largely had 5 to 6 hours to do 2 hours worth of work. So that was 3 to 4 hours where all I had to do was stay awake and hope that the boys slept through the night. Typically, I spent that time chatting online or watching TV on my laptop or reading. However, sometimes things did get a bit creepy. There would be times throughout the day where I would be talking to one of the boys, getting him dressed, and he would stop what he was doing and just stare over my shoulder. I'm pretty short for a guy, only 5'7", so if someone is standing behind me, they're pretty easy to see. Obviously, there would be no one behind me or I would have mentioned it. There were a few times where one of the boys would actually point up toward the ceiling and say, "Who's that? Who's she?" I think those moments were the second scariest thing for me. Other times, I could hear walking down in the basement. The office was in the basement and the door was kept locked so the boys wouldn't go down there. or times where I would hear the door to the laundry room slam. Sometimes when I worked mornings after the boys had left for school, I could hear children laughing in the house, and other staff had mentioned hearing it too. The scariest moment in the house for me was a night shift. I was laying on the couch in the living room. The couch was against the wall and had a chair directly next to it so that they were touching, and the chair was right next to the doorway in the kitchen. The kitchen led to the hallway that led to the bathroom and the boys' room, so I was laying on the couch with my head closest to the hallway to better hear if the boys got up. You had to react quickly if they did, or you might have a big mess on your hands. When I heard footsteps. Now the boys who were down the hall were small boys and both needed help getting their shoes on, but these were heavy footsteps, and they sounded like someone wearing heavy boots. I froze. The steps came down the hall, into the kitchen, and into the living room. Then I heard the air leaving the cushion on the chair that was literally 6 inches away from the back of my head, as if someone had just sat down. I took a deep breath and turned around. No one was there. I was freaked out, but I had a job to do, and honestly, if I was mistaken about the direction or placement of those footsteps, and someone was in one of the boys' room, I would rather face them than let the boys get hurt. So knowing where I heard the footsteps, I walked back just to be sure. I look in on the boys. They're all asleep. I didn't get much more reading done that night, but I think that's the cleanest the house has ever been. Ever since I can remember, I've had what I assume to be a dark entity attached to or following me. I call it the Shadow Man because it looks like a very dark silhouette of a tall man that appears to me, usually when I am going through a rough time in my life. Now I think this is important to note that the entity appears to me mostly at night, but also during the day, usually when I am alone. But I must mention that I do not suffer from sleep paralysis, have never hallucinated, except after surgery, have never taken hallucinogenic drugs, etc., and I have seen it in multiple houses I've lived in, and it's been a part of my earliest memories. I usually see the Shadow Man at night, sometimes walking with a jolt, and it is at the foot of my bed just standing over me. When I was young, my mother used to tell me to command it to go away, but ever since I turned 12, that hasn't worked. When I was 12, I was in my bed at my dad's house when I saw it manifest through my sliding closet door that was a mirror. It started as a mist, and the color slowly became darker, and it seemed to take a more three-dimensional shape. I was terrified and hid under the covers with my eyes shut tight, and felt the corner of my bed pressed down with an unseen weight that I moved as far away from as I could. I was too afraid to say anything aloud, but in my head I was shouting, "Get out! Leave me alone," as loud as I could possibly think. Eventually, I fell asleep and didn't see it again for another few months. When I was 15, I started dating my current boyfriend. He is a skeptic and always has been, and has never believed my stories of the Shadow Man. When I was 18, we got an apartment together, and the first time I saw the Shadow Man there, I was home alone and called him, hysterically crying because the Shadow Man moved towards me at warp-like speed, and I dropped to the floor and closed my eyes, crying for it to go away. My boyfriend thought it was a ploy to get him to come home early from work, and he just told me to get into bed and try to take a nap until we got home at about 3 p.m. This happened at about 12 in the afternoon. After much begging and pleading on my end, we eventually got a dog because it would make me feel safer. When I was 20, I was in the kitchen downstairs making dinner with my dog by my side, and I got the feeling of static electricity on the back of my neck that I always got before I saw the Shadow Man, and I turned to see it in the dining room, and I looked down, and my dog's hackles were raised, and I called for my boyfriend, scared but determined to make him believe me. He came down the stairs, and by this point my dog was growling and barking, something very unusual for him, as we have heard him bark only a handful of times, and he has only ever growled 2 other times when I felt I was in danger, but those are stories for another time. And my boyfriend said he saw the air almost shimmer where my dog and I saw the Shadow Man standing, and it just faded out of sight when my boyfriend got to me, but at least he believes me now. I'm so grateful to my dog for making enough of a scene for my boyfriend to come down, because now I'm taken seriously, and at least I'm not alone in this. I remember when I was 13 years old. We were living in Florida in the suburbs of Orlando. We have since moved up to Oklahoma to get back in touch with God, as my grandpa pastors a pretty big church there in Tulsa. Anyway, I played in a soccer program called Upward. I loved every second of it, especially playing with my best friend at the time, Brandon. We'd goof off most of the time, and neither of us were too good at the sport, but we both loved it. Now some explanation. Brandon has a moderate case of autism. His was a bit worse than mine, however, and he'd often overreact to small situations and go off in his own little world. Normal stuff. He was really into Sonic.exe and Slender Man, all things horror. His parents didn't know how to deal with him properly. I imagine this is why Brandon did what he did on this particular night, or it could have been his obsession with things of its nature. Oh, also, we're both homeschooled, so we did school whenever we wanted. So Brandon and I bugged his mom about letting me stay the night after a successful soccer game one night. She said it was okay with her. Then Brandon suggested a week. She said no and instead suggested 3 days. I agreed on that, and Brandon did too. I put them at this point and also agreed. It was a done deal. I packed up and headed over there. When I was dropped off at the house, Brandon greeted me. He talked about what we were going to do, almost none of which we did, and we walked to his bedroom. We instead talked about random things, and his older sister, who was 15, joined us later that night. We all went to bed late at night. The next day came and we woke up pretty late. That is, Ash, Brandon's sister, and I did. Brandon was nowhere to be found. We decided not to worry about it and talk to each other instead. About half an hour passed and I decided we needed to find Brandon. Ash went to her bedroom instead. I walked around the house, and with no luck decided to look outside. Immediately my senses were attacked by a foul, sour, stinging odor, as if the sources were right next to me. I remember recoiling in surprise. I got away from whatever the smell was, going toward the lake they lived on. I saw Brandon walking along the shore, holding something red and brown in his arms. It looked like a towel. It was about as long as his forearm. I faintly heard him singing something to himself as he walked. I silently made my way over to him, hoping he wouldn't hear me. I wanted to try and scare him, not thinking at all about what he was holding. He went toward the small kayak house that they had for, you guessed it, kayaking. I figured the perfect time to attack would be when he walked in there, where it was dark. I smiled and dashed behind a tree to wait for him to enter. Brandon stopped right outside the door and locked it in both of his hands in front of himself. He lifted it to his side, and I got a good view of the carcass of a rabbit. My eyes opened so wide in shock I couldn't blink. He started slamming it against the tin build of the shack, screaming. He opened the door and used the edge of the door where the doorknob was and slammed the rabbit's spine into it. A sickening snap was heard and I felt dizzy. I walked back to the house and entered it, and I began crying. It scared me so badly that I was bawling. I soon gathered myself and decided against saying anything about it to anyone because I truly thought no one would believe me. Brandon came in later on, and we hung out as usual with the exception of my newfound knowledge. Night fell, and we all talked and went to bed a little earlier this time, so we'd wake up later and have more day to burn. Brandon wanted to show me something first, though, and got me out of bed. We walked outside on his back porch, and the same smell from earlier that day stung my senses. I remember this night vividly. "Ugh, what is that smell, dude?" I asked, cupping my hands over my nose and mouth. He walked over to a small box with holes poked in it, opened it, and picked something up out of it, facing away from me. He turned around excitedly and held out what he picked up. "This," he said, smiling. It was an extremely skinny rabbit, red stains on its brown fur. It smelled horrific. "Ew, dude, what is that?" I shouted, jumping back. It had things moving in its fur. Its eyeballs were sunk into its skull almost to the point that they had fallen out of the sockets. Brandon had a sad look on his face. "What?" he asked curiously.
"What do you mean, what?"
I shouted angrily at him.
"I killed it. Look at what's happening to it. It's cool, right?"
he asked me.
"No, you're a monster,"
I yelled at him. His face completely went blank after that.
"I'll kill you next."
My parents pulled up after I'd gotten Brandon's mom up and asked her if I could go home. I told her I was homesick. I know, I probably should have mentioned the threat, but the only thing I wanted to do was get out of there. I told my parents while we were driving home, who in turn told his parents. I really haven't seen him since then. Like I said, we moved up to Oklahoma soon afterward for unrelated reasons. I used to live out in the country in Manitoba, Canada. Like real boonies. You had to bike or drive to go anywhere aside from a railroad-side ice cream parlor. At night, it would get pretty dark too. With my mother and stepdad, we had 3 small dogs and a cat. I was often left in charge of all of them. I was kind of resentful for all the work on top of the schooling and homework, but I loved the animals, so I couldn't blame them too much. Unless they made a huge mess, then I'd be pretty ticked, but that's not entirely relevant. What is that I would routinely take them all out before going to bed, and I would go to bed very, very late at night like any 14-year-old with such lax parenting. Emma, Lady, and my dog Carmelita would usually stay in the front yard, which was a vast acreage of flat land with a tiny ditch. It was easy to see the small dogs and call them back in. Sometimes Emma would wander. My mother's Cairn Terrier had a bit of a rebellious side to her, but it wasn't her who took off this night. It was Lady, the Cocker Spaniel. She was a protective and watchful eye while the others were mostly divas. Frustrated, I ran off after her around to the back of the house, which is a steep slope toward a waterbed that is an offshoot of the Red River. What I saw slowly sprawling across the slope still gives me chills. These things were about chest height to me and 25 feet away. Pale tan or gray mostly. No tails. No muzzles, but on all fours with long legs that were longer in the front. They turned their almost featureless faces up to us at the top of the slope. Their eyes were large and glowed in the faint back porch lights like big marbles. Luckily, Lady had frozen at the top with me, her hackles raised like a hyena. The creatures were still walking, but were bobbing their heads about, looking at us. I grabbed the dog by crouching quickly, frightened we'd be attacked, and bolted around the side to the front again, calling for the others to come inside. Emma and Carmelita were already sitting at the door waiting for us. I guess they'd figured it was too chilly for them to stay out so long, but truthfully, my out-of-shape self was boiling from the adrenaline. I refused to take them out after dark after that, which unfortunately resulted in plenty of messes I had to clean up. I would occasionally see those strange things crossing our backyard after that. They'd only look up at my house if I had the lights on and was obviously moving in clear view. Another night I woke up, radio flashing 1 a.m. or so that. I wasn't sure why I woke up at that time until I realized I wasn't alone. I sleep in the basement at that time. My windows overlook the backyard, but only slightly. It was located under the back porch, which was able to be walked under if you simply stooped a bit. One of those things with pale skin and huge green eyes lowered its head as it looked through my window. I froze. I'm not sure if I moved at all after waking up. It sort of bobbed its head around for a brief time only and then quickly bolted off as if something had frightened it. To this day I have no idea what they were. They almost acted like deer, but they hardly look like them. Their bodies looked closer to misshapen dogs or humans. Their faces were hard to see, but from what I could tell they had no muzzles and very big eyes. I tried looking up what cryptids or myths were native to where I live, but everything just sort of points to Wendigo or skinwalkers, and I'm not entirely